whilst young people my age and people at school on a Saturday and Sunday mornings were watching Saturday morning TV, were relaxing with their families, playing games, just chilling out at the weekends, I was knocking doors in the cold, in the rain, in the heat, for at least 2 hours on Saturday and Sunday mornings. Why? Because I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Guys, in this video, I'm going to share my experience of being a Jehovah's Witness, my life as a witness, and why I left, and also my journey to finding and exploring my faith. So stay with me, guys. Hi guys, thanks for being with me today. So today it's a completely different topic to my usual content on this channel, but it's been something that has been requested a couple of times, and particularly more recently people have asked me to share about my experience as a Jehovah's Witness. So today's the day. Now this video, it is not meant to bash Jehovah's Witnesses or anybody's belief, whatever their belief system is. It is not intended to do that. It is not about hate or making disparaging remarks, nothing like that. Today I am just going to share my experience. Now some people may be offended, I don't know, I may have Jehovah's Witnesses who follow me, I don't know, but again, it is not to offend anybody. It is just simply sharing my personal experience, the same way that people are free to share their experiences in life, whether it's travel or family life or raising kids or their faith or belief. In the same vein, I'm doing this. So I'm just setting the ground rules there. It's not intended to offend anybody. So here we go. Now I will say that if you want more detail about the actual belief system of Jehovah's Witnesses, the controversy that goes along with that, and all of that backstory, there are lots and lots and lots of YouTube channels that go into that. There's lots of them. There's also podcasts about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and the topics and the issues around Jehovah's Witnesses are so extensive that people have really successful channels about Jehovah's Witnesses and also about just specific elements of it. It is really, really extensive. So, but you know, if I was to do that, I'd probably be here for a month going into that, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be sharing my personal experience. So where does it start? Well, I was born into the belief system. My parents were Jehovah's Witnesses. My mother started studying with the Jehovah's Witnesses I think when she was a young mother back in the Caribbean, and she knew my dad. They were in a relationship together, and the Jehovah's Witnesses said to them, you know what, you need to stop living in sin basically, and you need to get married. I think my parents would have married anyway regardless of the Jehovah's Witnesses, but you know, Jehovah's Witnesses, they do like to get themselves entangled and embroiled into people's lives, and that, according to my mother, was what prompted them to get married. So they got married, but before they could get married in the Kingdom Hall, they had to get baptised, because with Jehovah's Witnesses there were lots of rules. If you want to get married as a Jehovah's Witness in the Kingdom Hall, which is their version of church, you have to meet certain criteria. So one of those was they had to be baptised. So they start both, well, my mother was studying the Bible with Jehovah's Witnesses, and my dad started, studying as well. And because they were studying, they were allowed to then get baptised. And then after they got baptised, they got married. And then after that, my dad moved to England, in the big mass migration. My dad moved to England. And whilst he was in England, interestingly enough, he was still a Jehovah's Witness, but I think my mother was the one who was more stronger in the faith. And because my dad had now come to England, my mother wasn't there. He was with his brother, my uncles, and his friends, and they just were not Jehovah's Witnesses. They were like, no, don't believe any of that. My dad just kind of stopped going. He wasn't as strong in the religion. And then when my mother joined him back 2 years later, she was still very strong as the Jehovah's Witness. So they started going together, started going back. But my dad, he just didn't he could see through it. He could see that a lot of what they were saying didn't make sense. He felt that a lot of it was just made up as they went along. And my mother, my parents were very different personalities. My father was very outgoing, and he would go down the pub, he would go, and he had his hobbies and he had his friends, and so he had his social life. But my mother, she was a very different character. She was very quiet, and because of that, she was more of a homebody, so she liked that, and she just had a couple of friends, and they were of Jehovah's Witnesses, so that sort of kept her more connected with religion. And then over time, when you have personal tragedies in your life, the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses also keep you locked in, because there were talk of Jehovah's Witnesses believe, and I'm going to touch on some of the beliefs. They believe that when you die, you were just sleeping and you were waiting for God. They refer to God as Jehovah. Jehovah is going to resurrect you to a paradise earth. So when you lose loved ones and you lose who you are, that essence of who you are, because you've lost your loved ones, messages like that and beliefs like that, and like dangling a carrot over your head, you've lost them now. They're sleeping in death, but you're going to see them again, and it's going to be very soon, and you're going to be living in this beautiful paradise earth where death is no more, and pain and sorrow and all of that is no more. People can buy into that. I know you might be listening to me and thinking, doesn't make sense. I know. But the way that the Jehovah's Witnesses religion is structured, it is, you are, I don't like to use the word brainwashed, but you are mind controlled. You are controlled into so many things, including what you believe. And if you don't believe what they teach you and they tell you, there are consequences. So my mother had this carrot dangling over her, and she bought into it. So my dad stopped going. My dad was like, one, they're not Christian. Two, they don't act as Christians. They're not loving and kind and supportive like Christians, and their beliefs are questionable. But my dad, he didn't stop my mother from going. So he allowed her to, I say allow, he didn't discourage her from going. So she continued going, and she took us, my brothers and sisters and me, along with her. So my brothers and sisters all grew up as Jehovah's Witnesses, and then when my brothers and sisters got, to teenage years, they, like my dad, was like, this is a load of nonsense. Don't believe it. They're making it up. It's very strict. It's very rigid. I don't want to be part of it. So they stopped going. Now, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, my mother should have shunned them. She should have stopped speaking to both her husband and her children. But my mother was like, no, that ain't happening. And as a result of that, she did, she was on the fringes of the Jehovah's Witness community. So she refused to shun them. She was like, no, they're my children and that's my husband and I love them and I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. I'm not going to shun them. So good on me, mother. And because she's just like, that's evil, that's wicked, that's wicked. It's like saying just because you like tea with milk and I don't, I just like black tea, I'm not going to talk to you, I'm going to shun you because you have milk in yours. Do you know what I mean? It's as ridiculous as that. So my mother was on the fringes. So my brothers and sisters stopped going, but me, I continued going. And I continued going, one, because I was very close to my mum. I was like that. Wherever my mum was, I was there. I was like literally still attached to the umbilical cord. But yeah, very much. So my mum was continued going and I just went with her, and I could remember some of my earliest memories, sort of like falling asleep on my mum's lap in the Kingdom Hall, or my mum saying, you've got a cold, you're not coming tonight, and I'd be crying because I'd want to go with her. So I just carried on going, although all my brothers and sisters had stopped. And over time, what was happening was I was very subtly being mind controlled. And I didn't know it. I didn't know it at the time. And I've got 2 grandchildren now. I would never, literally over my dead body, will I let my grandchildren, go to a Kingdom Hall. When I had my son, my mother wanted to take my son, because by this time I'd stopped going. She wanted to take my son to the Kingdom Hall. I was like, no, period, no. Because I knew I'd had that experience of how it can subtly get into your psyche. And that's what happened to me. And I'm going to come and tell you a little bit more about that. So I continued going to the Kingdom Hall, and it was just in my psyche. I can remember being 5, and what Jehovah's Witnesses would encourage young people, children, babies like myself. My earliest memory is being 5, is having the little tracts, the little leaflets, and saying, I'm going to go and preach to my teacher at school. Yeah. And whilst it was voluntary, it was already in my psyche that that's what I needed to do. So I can remember preparing what I was going to say. I must have been about no more than 5 or 6. In fact, I think I was probably 4 or 5, to be honest, because I can still remember it. And I remember preparing it with my mother. And then my mother asking me at the end of the day, did you talk to your teacher? And I said no, I was shy. But it took me a couple of weeks, and then I eventually left my teacher with this tract. Seriously, a 5-year-old preaching religion to grown adults? But I was praised. I was praised in the Kingdom Hall, because it was like, wow, look at this little kid, 5 years old, and she's preaching and teaching to her teachers. So this continued. I was continued going to the Kingdom Hall with my mum, and continued, growing up. And every meeting, day in, day out, I was being conditioned, didn't realise it. And they do that because the life as Jehovah's Witness was, we had at the time, things have changed now, but at the time there was 3 meetings a week. There was a Sunday meeting, and you'd have to read your Watchtower, underline it and prepare it like on the Saturday night, and then go on a Sunday. And then on the Monday evening, me and my mum used to read through the book. There was always a book we were studying. We would read the book, underline it and prepare for the Tuesday meeting. And then on Tuesday we would go to what they called the book study. That was on the Tuesday. Then on the Wednesday evening, we would be preparing for the meeting on the Thursday. And then on the Thursday we would go to the meetings. And those meetings in the week were always evenings. They started like 7:30. So as a child, bearing in mind I had school the next morning, I wasn't getting home till about 9:30, 10 o'clock, having to go to bed and then get up the next morning to go to school. So that was the Thursday. And then on the Friday night, we were preparing to go out in field service, which is when you knock doors. And then Saturday afternoon, you were now preparing for the meeting for Sunday. So 7 days a week, my life, even as a 5-year-old child, was Jehovah's Witness material. There was just no element for fun or time out. There was nothing. And everybody did that, whether you were a child, you was a mother, you was a father, you was an old one. That was the life of Jehovah's Witness. You were always studying, always preparing. And what I realised as I got older and I left is all of that studying was conditioning. It was conditioning my mind, conditioning my thinking, conditioning my lifestyle. Because it's not like, it wasn't like you read a book and then you would get together and discuss the book and share different thoughts and ideas. Oh no, it wasn't like that. It was very much, and I don't know if you've ever seen like the Watchtower or one of Jehovah's Witnesses books, but you've got a paragraph and you read the paragraph, and at the bottom of the page you've got questions. You've then got to read the questions and then find the answer to that question in that paragraph. And those were the only acceptable answers you could give. You couldn't go off track and say, well, actually, I think this, or, I think that. No, you'd be shut down. You can only give the answer that is in the paragraph. And what I realised they were doing is it was reinforcement. That's what it was. It's reinforcement. They tell you, for example, they'll say, this is a cup. It's white and gold. And then the question was, what colour is the cup? And the only answer you could give is, it's white and gold. Reinforcement. And you're being reinforced in their doctrines. So that was my life, Monday to Friday. And we would be going to the Kingdom Hall. And I, as an adult, was diagnosed with a condition called lupus. And if you follow me on this channel, you'll know that I've talked about my lupus. And looking back, I really believe that a lot of my symptoms stemmed from being a Jehovah's Witness, and I'm going to call it trauma, the religious trauma that I went through, and I'll tell you why. When I was being conditioned, brainwashed, mind controlled, having all of their philosophies reinforced, Jehovah's Witnesses don't separate in their meetings, in their when they have their religious meetings, they don't separate children from the adults, not like in a church in Sunday school. everybody studies the same material in the same room at the same time. And I tell you, I can go into this in detail and I won't do it here because it's a topic for another time perhaps, but some of the things that they would be talking about adult relationships, sex, acceptable positions for sex. They'd be talking about, the women's menstrual cycle, men ejaculate, all of that stuff. There was no filter, and everybody, doesn't matter whether you was a baby, right, a teenager, right through to an old person, everybody heard the same thing. And I can remember sitting in the meeting, I must have been about 12, 13, 14, and being embarrassed as hell. Couldn't look at any of the young men, couldn't look at anybody else, because they were talking about sex and sex positions. I know. And I look back now and I think that's actually abuse, because you'd never put a 5-year-old in a room where porn is on the TV. You'd never do that. Well, I hope people wouldn't do that. But if you did, that's a form of child abuse. But yet they were happy for children to sit in a Christian religious meeting and they're talking about sex. And I'm honestly, there are Watchtowers. If you don't believe me, you can search their archives, and there's Watchtowers. Not unless, of course, they've removed it because they realise just how sordid it is. But there are Watchtowers talking about, sexual positions, and they come into your bedroom and they monitor. And I don't mean physically, but they set down rules and laws around what sexual position is acceptable between a man and a woman. Shock, honestly. Anyway, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to get back on track. So, I tell you, I can have a whole YouTube channel just about Jehovah's Witnesses. In fact, I used to have a whole channel. It's called Watching the Watchtower, where I just spoke about Jehovah's Witnesses. Yeah. There's honestly shocking. So I believe that my condition, lupus, can be triggered by stress. And since I was a child, I was just bombarded with stress. Now, one of the things Jehovah's Witnesses teach in these meetings with babies right through to the elderly is the concept of Armageddon. Because they're a doomsday cult. They believe that the world is going to end, God's going to come and he's going to destroy the earth, and only Jehovah's Witnesses are going to survive this. So if you want to survive, they're dangling this carrot, if you want to survive, you need to be a Jehovah's Witness, but not just any old Jehovah's Witness. You need to be a good Jehovah's Witness, and you need to obey everything that we tell you. Yeah, even if it doesn't sound reasonable or rational or, good. It doesn't, even if it sounds a cuckooist thing, you need to believe it, and without question. And by the way, don't question us. And only those Jehovah's Witnesses would survive. And they would have their magazines, their books. They even had a children's book called My Book of Bible Stories, alternatively named My Book of Horror Stories, because honestly, it was a yellow book. So I don't know if anybody's seen it, if anybody's got copies. They're probably like in charity shops at the moment. The Jehovah's Witnesses don't use it anymore, but I was a child of the 70s and the 80s, and that was really popular. You were given that book, and in there depict. So it's supposed to be Bible characters, so it tells you the Bible stories, but some of the stories in there was just horrific. horrific. There was these images of Jezebel, of the wild beast, of honestly, there was the flood with babies and puppies drowning. But a lot of their magazines and their books would depict that at Armageddon, the earth would crack open, people would be falling down into the pits of the earth, fireballs would be raining down and destroying and killing people. And I would look at these things and I was petrified. I was petrified. And this was being reinforced to me week after week after week after week, that unless I was a good Jehovah's Witness, there was a couple of fireballs with my name on it waiting to come and strike me down, and then the earth was going to swallow me up. And it scared me. I was also told that God's going to come back like a thief in the night. So I couldn't sleep because I was thinking, God's going to just come any minute now. And then the other thing that we were told was God's always watching you. He's always watching you. He's always listening, so he knows what you're getting up to. And I would be freaking out thinking, I've got to be on my best behaviour because God's watching me. He can see everything that I'm doing. And I realise now that was manipulation. It's a manipulation tactic. I've got to be a good Jehovah's Witness. I've got to believe everything that they say. I can't question it, because if I do, I'm going to be destroyed at Armageddon. And all of that got deep into my psyche. And I look back now, and what that did, it caused stress. It caused stress in my body. And from when I was a child, my earliest memories of being about 8 or 9 is just constantly being sick when my joints were hurting. I've told this story before on my channel, is that my mother took me to the doctor because I was about 8 or 9. My mum thought that I just didn't want to do PE, and the doctor said, no, she's got juvenile arthritis. And I believe that was triggered. Now, I'm not a medical practitioner, and I do have a condition, but what I do know is that condition can be triggered by stress. Well, it is triggered by stress as well as other factors. And I believe that was instrumental. So I honestly put my hands up and say that the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses made me chronically sick. And it was the fear. And that religion, as I grew older, so I voluntarily went, even when my mother started to not go, I still continued to go. I was about 13, 14, because up until then, I had no friends outside of Jehovah's Witnesses. I couldn't be friends with people at school. I could see them at school, I could talk to them, but I wasn't allowed to hang out with them outside school. I could only have friends that were Jehovah's Witnesses, and there was only one girl in my class, and luckily we got on, but I could only associate with her, and I don't recall anybody else in my school being Jehovah's Witnesses. So my friendship groups were very limited. So I could have friends at the Kingdom Hall, but Jehovah's Witnesses, they're conditional. They have conditional friendships. They will tell you that they're very loving and kind and, they're best friends in the world, but it's conditional. And you only they're friends if you're a good Jehovah's Witness and if your family's a good Jehovah's Witness. Well, at this time, my dad had nothing to do with Jehovah's Witnesses. My mother was on the fringes, so I was always kept at arm's length. So I would be hearing about, the young people going off to skating and off to the cinema and off to meals, and I was never invited. I know, because I realised now I was also on the fringe. So I was very lonely growing up as a child. I had no friends in school. no for real friends in the Kingdom Hall, and one friend that was in my class. So they keep you very, very isolated. So I thought, well, the best thing that I've got is, and by this time all my brothers and sisters had grown up and left home, because I'm the youngest of my parents' children. My dad didn't object to me going. It was like, well, something for her to do, you know. And my mum was like, yeah, as and when I'm ready to go, I'll come with you. But, you know, my mother was kind of like, she was seeing the hypocrisy in the religion, so she didn't really go. So I was bored, I was lonely, so threw myself into the religion, you know, and would go out knocking doors, because that was the only thing to do on the weekends. And I remember once I wanted to do the the Duke of Edinburgh awards game. I don't know, some of you might remember that. And I started doing that. I must have been about 16 at the time. And I remember it was very frowned upon, because the comments that I got from the elders and other people in the congregation was, why are you going to volunteer in the hospital? You can volunteer in the preaching work, knocking doors. So even like activities that I wanted to do, wasn't allowed to do that. It was frowned upon. So, you know, I was very limited in, you know, what I was doing. So, yeah, so grew up very isolated, and, you know, very much in the mindset of the Jehovah's Witness, and was taught that if I wasn't a good girl and doing what they told me to do, fireballs would come and kill me. So I had all of this trauma, all of this stress that I was carrying. I didn't realise it was trauma and stress until I left years ago. So I was carrying all of this. And then on top of that, there was all of the man-made rules that they put on top of that. Couldn't celebrate birthdays. I had never celebrated my birthday until I was well in my 30s, late 40s, and even then there was a lot of guilt around that. Couldn't celebrate my birthday, wasn't allowed to celebrate Easter, Mother's Day, Father's Day, anybody's birthday, yeah, not just anybody's birthday, and Christmas. Couldn't celebrate all of those. And Jehovah's Witnesses always had a line as to why you couldn't celebrate it, and they tried to say it's, you know, it's in the Bible. Wasn't. It was all man-made. And again, it was a form of control. And it's like, well, if we can control what you celebrate, then we've got you. You'll do what we want. The same way that with adults, if, you know, we can control who you date, and I say that because you weren't allowed to marry anybody that wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. Yeah. And even then, they had to be of good standing. Yeah, you couldn't marry anybody that was like hot on the fringes, you know, that was shunned. That was frowned upon. So they wanted you to marry like a good, strong Jehovah's Witness. So they had all of these rules. You know, I forgot where I was going with that. They had all these rules around, you know. Oh, I know where I was going. Yeah, so they have all these rules around who you can date, who you can marry. And then once you were married, what kind of relationships you can have in your own bed. Yeah? And even like, you know, what you do to your own body, you know, who you did it with, they were controlling that. And I realised that after I left, that if they could control what you do in your own bed, in the privacy of your own home with your partner, there's nothing that they can't control. They can control whether you celebrate your birthday, whether you give your mother a gift on Mother's Day. They can control what you think, what you watch. You know, we weren't even allowed, there were certain programs we weren't even allowed to watch, certain books we couldn't read. It was, honestly, it was just endless. So, you know, there was all this control, so never celebrated birthdays, Easter, Christmas, any of those things. My life was just about going to meetings. When I was coming up to 16, I was still, by this time, I was so mind controlled. And I was spilling off all of their rhetoric. And now, if I speak to a Jehovah's Witness, I know what they're going to say even before they say it. And if I ask them a question, I know the answer even before they say it, because it's just reinforcement. And that is exactly how I was reinforced. I know exactly what they're going to say. You know, you can ask me, why don't Jehovah's Witnesses celebrate birthdays? I can tell you straight off. And you can ask a Jehovah's Witness and it'll be exactly the same response, because they teach you by reinforcement and repetition. So I wasn't allowed to do any of that. My life was just very much going to meetings, studying and going out and knocking doors. And then, so I've talked about all the religious, the celebrations, you can do that. I've talked about how they get involved in your life, who you can marry, you know, who you can date, and even when you get married, you know, what you can do in your marriage. But it doesn't stop there. They even go as far as medical, you know, medical treatments. And growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, now they have flip-flopped on this several times, but growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, their Watchtower and everything that Jehovah's Witnesses taught was in their Watchtower. The Watchtower magazine was like their policy booklet. So they had two magazines. They had the Awake, which was kind of like just general news and things of interest like nature and stuff like that. And then you had the hardcore one, which was the Watchtower, otherwise known as the Witch Tower. And in that was very much the policy, and that was what you had to study. You had to study that, and you had to underline it. And when you underlined it, it showed you'd studied it. And then that's when you go to the meetings on the Sunday, they would read the paragraph, ask the questions, and you'd have to reinforce the response from the paragraph. Couldn't go off track. And so in those policy booklets or documents, they would have topics around medical issues. And growing up, and you know, you can go back if they're available, because what happened was they realised just how wrong they were and got rid of a lot of their older publications and magazines. But this one may still be around, because I remember this from like the 70s growing up. But they said that if you have an organ transplant, that's cannibalism, and you weren't allowed to do that. And if you did have an organ transplant, even to save your life, you'll be disfellowshipped. They're going to kick you out. So that was the one thing. But the main thing that a lot of people know Jehovah's Witnesses for is blood transfusions. That you're not allowed to have a blood transfusion. And again, I can tell you exactly why they say that, and the scripture that they will use, the scripture in Acts, to reinforce that, which is a load of nonsense. Yes, the scripture is there, but it's got nothing to do with blood transfusions, because blood transfusions is a modern, you know, blood transfusions wasn't even around in Victorian, Edwardian times. It wasn't even around, never mind back in, you know, after Jesus walked the earth. It wasn't around. You know, blood transfusion has been a modern 20th century medical intervention, but yet they use that one scripture to control. Because again, if we can control what medical treatments you've got, then we can control what you do in your bed, what you can do to yourself, what you can, you know, what's you watch, you read, what you celebrate. Control. They've got you. So you weren't allowed to have blood transfusion. And as a result of that, people have died. Children have died. And then they flip-flopped on it because, they've had a few challenges from, people in different countries and the courts, the legal system from different countries. So now they're saying you can have blood fraction. So essentially, you can have the burger bun, you can have the lettuce, you can have the tomato, you can have the sauce, you can have the burger, but you can't have it together as a sandwich. That's essentially what they're saying, is that you can have blood fractions, but you can't have blood. What? I know, it makes no sense. So you can have blood fractions, but you can't have a blood transfusion, but you're also not allowed to give blood. Makes no sense. But they go one step further. Not only do they say that, but they now have these committees of non-medical people, just elders in the Kingdom Hall. They have no medical training, no medical background, nothing. And when people are in hospital, they go to the hospital to check that they haven't had blood transfusion. And when my mother was, when she was dying and was in hospital, they came to the hospital. And the first thing they said to me was, has the issue of blood and blood transfusions been raised? And honestly, if it wasn't for my mother, I was so angry. I was like, my mother's here, she's dying, and the only thing you want to know is blood transfusion. So, so we had to sign, when I was growing up, I had to sign a card. It's called a no blood card, and you carried it everywhere with you because in the case of an emergency, if you needed blood, they would find this card, which was deemed as a legal document and signed, and they couldn't give you a blood transfusion. There's a movie starring Emma Thompson, and it's about a child who needed a blood transfusion, and their parents were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they refused to give this child a blood transfusion. And it talks you through how it goes through the legal system. It's called the Children's Act. Brilliant movie. One to watch if you want to find. I know it's a dramatisation and a movie, but it's going to give you a bit more understanding of the Jehovah's Witness and their stance on blood. Just terrible. I mean, I was never in a position where I needed blood, but and I dread to think, because I was so mind controlled, I probably wouldn't have had a blood transfusion. But then when I left, I just thought, this is just ridiculous. Yeah. So so there was all of these things, they controlled everything. And you had to just grin and bear it and smile and pretend to be happy, because that, Jehovah was the happy God. And, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you had to be happy, even though a lot of people just definitely were really unhappy, really sad, really miserable, but you had to be happy. The Jehovah's Witnesses call themselves the truth. And I got to a point where I was always asking, why is it called the truth? Whereas Jesus said he is the truth. He's the truth, the way and the life. But yet, Jehovah's Witnesses call themselves the truth. And it was little things like that that started making me think something doesn't feel right. And then, you know, the other thing that Jehovah's Witnesses are known for is disfellowshipping and shunning. And if somebody didn't follow the rules or asked too many questions and they didn't like it, or was doing something in their marriage that they shouldn't, or was caught, you know, going to a birthday party, or, you know, going to a wedding of a family member in a church, you know, something like that, you could be disfellowshipped. And honestly, there were so many stories out there on the internet about people who've been through that disfellowshipping process. I was never disfellowshipped because I was the good Jehovah's Witness. So I wasn't disfellowshipped, but the whole disfellowshipping and shunning practice, I used to look at that and think, I just can't agree with it. And I remember, you know, in my kingdom hall, people were being disfellowshipped and being shunned. And what used to happen was they used to make an announcement and they used to say, this person is no longer a Jehovah's Witness. And that was a signal to everybody, shut it down. You don't look at them, you don't talk to them, you have nothing to do with them. Again, control. And I remember meeting somebody in the park. It was a carnival in the park, and I remember seeing them and going over to them and saying, hey, how are you? And they said, you shouldn't be talking to me. I was like, well, why not? They said, I'm disfellowshipped. And I could not accept that I should not speak to them, because I was like, this religion is controlling me and telling me who I should and should not be speaking to. And I didn't like it. So I started looking at that and thinking, this doesn't feel right. It does not feel right. Now, on the contrast, you can have, you know, people who abuse their wives, their children, you know, family members, other children. There's, you know, for want of a better word, CSA, look it up, you know, type in CSA and you'll see what I mean. On the internet, there's been whole massive commissions in Australia, court cases in America, all sorts of things where, you know, typically a man has interfered with a child, and the man is then repented and it's like, oh, that's fine, it's okay, you know, we forgive you, your sins are forgiven. But if that child or their parents goes to the police to report it, they shut it down. That person's going to be shunned or disfellowshipped. So to me, it was very warped. So when I saw this person who said they were disfellowshipped, I was like, well, what have you done? And they were like, well, I was caught smoking. And I was just like, so I could not agree with that. And Jehovah's Witnesses will tell you that disfellowshipping is a loving arrangement. It's the furthest thing from loving. You know, it was just awful. So I started looking at things like that and thought, it doesn't feel right. And I was also controlled, because when I left school, you couldn't have a career. Forget that. A career was frowned upon. You had your education up until 16 in the UK, and then you were expected to start pioneering, going out, knocking doors full time. And Muggins here did that. 90 hours a month, I would do that. And I, you know, did that. Wasn't allowed a career. You could have a job. So I took part-time jobs, you know, just menial jobs just to get by and pay the rent. But the concept of going to college and having a career was no way. Because when you go to college, you're going to be hanging out with people who are critical thinkers, and they're going to make you realise that actually your religion's a load of nonsense. So that's not allowed. And so I being a good Jehovah's Witness, didn't go to college. I wanted to, but it was so frowned upon. So went out knocking doors. So that together with, the arrangements for disfellowshipping people and not talking to them over something so trivial, but yet they could have a criminal in the congregation, and because they have said, "Oh, I'm sorry," then all is forgiven and they're not reporting it to the police. That's a topic for another time, guys. There's tons of stuff out there on the internet about the massive cover-ups. Oh, shocking. If you want more information, do check that out. So that along with, and then some of their belief systems, about just some of their practices. God, it's just too much to go into today. So much of their practices. I was like, even though I'd been brought up to believe it, as I'm getting older, I'm starting to look at things and think, doesn't feel right for me. And then they would say, the leader, so in the late 60s and early 70s, you would have a president of the organisation. And then they changed that to now a governing body. So you'd have a group of 8 men in New York who claim that they got special instructions from the Lord himself. And, and on that basis, they're disseminating information that you've got to believe. Otherwise, that fireball with its name on it, your name on it, it's coming straight for you. So there was all of that, and, some of the beliefs, the practices, the blood issue, and none of them medically trained. If you had problems, family problems, you'd have to go and talk to them, but yet none of them had any training in therapy or counselling. They were just ordinary men. They worked in factories, worked in shops, were window cleaners, unemployed. They were not trained in any aspect, but yet there were now therapists and counsellors and sex therapists and medical practitioners, to give you guide. It was a nonsense. So I started looking at this, plus the fact that I was very lonely. I was on the fringes. I wasn't included in any social activities. And I was just like, I'm just not enjoying this. I'm not enjoying this. At the time I was about 19, 20, I was like, this is not how I want my life to be. I don't want to be living in fear. And all this time, this fear was being compounded and building up inside of me. I lived in fear. The practices, the constant drudgery of going to meetings and studying was just really, really overwhelming. There was just no enjoyment. And, I started thinking, I want more out of life. And I couldn't verbalise that to any Jehovah's Witness, because I knew that if I did, they would run and tell the elders and I'd be at risk of being shunned. So what had happened was, at this point, I was like 20 and I'd gone to St. Kitts for the very first time, and I went out there for 6 weeks and I loved it. I loved St. Kitts. And whilst I was out there, I was going to their meetings and hanging out with Jehovah's Witnesses, but it was totally different. Yes, like the philosophies and the teachings were still exactly the same because they're global and these messages go out around the world. But now there was a social life. People would be like, after the meetings, forget full service, we're going down the beach. So we'd go down the beach, we'd have barbecues and we were hanging out. And for the first time ever, I felt part of a community with young people that was fun and engaging. I was like, why can't it be like this back home? So I realised that there was these cultural differences. So I came back And I got my own home, got my own flat when I was 20, late 20s. And because I got my own flat, there was all these aspersions going around about me, thinking, like, I remember elders coming to my home, wanting to check out if I was living with a man, if I had a boyfriend, what was going on, why I had left home. And I was like, nothing's gone on. I just want my independence, that's all, you know. So there was all these aspersions going on, and then it was like, oh, you know, she's again on the fringe, and I just didn't like it. So what happened was, at this point, I had so many questions now. I was really questioning the belief. I was just seeing so many things, because now I was older. I was, you know, maturing. I was starting to think, and I've always been I've always been a thinker. That's me. I've always looked at something and thought about it. If you tell me that this is a cup, I'm going to look at it and I'm going to question it. I'm going to ask questions. That's the one thing about me. I always ask a million questions. I'm going to question it until I'm satisfied. And now that I was older, getting older, I started questioning, well, what's wrong with celebrating birthdays and Christmases? What's wrong with honouring my mother and my father? The Bible tells me to honour them. Why can't I do that? What's wrong with giving my mother a bouquet of flowers on Mother's Day, or a gift to my dad on Father's Day? What's wrong with that? You know, I don't understand the blood transfusion thing. It doesn't make sense to me in the Bible. I don't understand why Jehovah's Witnesses put so much emphasis on Jehovah but almost demote Jesus, when every other Christian faith hails Jesus. And I didn't understand that. It's almost like they just sidelined Jesus. Everything was about Jehovah. I didn't understand that. So I started questioning that. You know, I didn't understand why Jehovah's Witnesses are the only Christian religion that talks about a paradise earth, when the Bible only mentions paradise 3 times. But yet Jehovah's Witnesses got this huge narrative around the paradise earth. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand why every other Christian said when they die they go to heaven, and Jehovah's Witnesses said, no, you're sleeping and then you're going to come back to a paradise. I didn't understand it. I was like, it doesn't make sense to me. I didn't understand why, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses don't refer to themselves as Christians. They refer themselves. So if I said to, a 7-day Adventist, or a Church of England goer, or a Catholic, I'd say, oh, what's your faith? And they would say, I'm a Christian. But you ask a Jehovah's Witness and they will tell you they are a Jehovah's Witness. They may tell you that they're Christian, but as an afterthought, but they will tell you first and foremost that they are a Jehovah's Witness. I didn't understand that. It didn't make sense to me. Didn't make sense. I didn't understand why I couldn't just read the Bible and have a discussion with somebody about the Bible. That wasn't allowed. You were an apostate if you did that. It wasn't allowed. Didn't understand why. I'm like, well, if my faith has to be based on the Bible, why can't I just pick it up and read it? No, you can only read it alongside our books, the Jehovah's Witness books, because that's the only way you're going to understand the Bible. I didn't understand why Jehovah's Witnesses would say, you know, offer a Bible study, but would pull out a book and you'd have to read. It was a question and answer from the book that you were studying. You were studying the book, not the Bible. And the Bible was kind of like, the side order. I didn't understand that. So there was loads and loads and loads of things that just wasn't making sense to me. And then I started thinking, hang on a minute, I'm out there 90 hours a month, knocking on doors, telling people about my belief and my faith, and I was questioning my own belief and my own faith. And I just thought, and at this time I was now what they call a pioneer, and so I just needed to get away. And I knew that if I ever expressed to any Jehovah's Witness those questions and those doubts, I'd be shut down. I'd be hauled into a meeting, I'd be questioned, and I'd be disfellowshipped. And I thought, they're having that control over me. So I had to plan my escape. Now, it sounds dramatic, but what happened was the hall that I used to go to, we had two congregations sharing the hall, and I was used to go to the meetings in the morning, and then there was a different congregation from another part of a local area that used to use it in the afternoon. So because I had moved at this point, I'd give up my flat and I moved into my sister's. And my sister lived in the territory, as they used to call it, of this other congregation who used to go to the afternoon meetings. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell the elders, the controllers, I'm going to tell them that I'm still a good Jehovah's Witness and everything. I'm still a pioneer. I'm still doing all things, still believing. But now, instead of coming to your morning meetings, I'm going to go to the afternoon meetings, because technically I live in the area of the new congregation. So that's what I did. Only they realised I wasn't going, because they obviously checked up and I wasn't going. So they called me and they said, right, we need to meet with you. And I was like, oh God. Well, I was living at my sister's at the time, so I said, okay, come on, let's see what you got to say. So went round, they came round, there was two elders, and they were grilling me, because what they wanted to know was, had I done anything which would warrant them forming what they call a judicial committee, which would basically be like their own legal system, their own court system, where I'd be hauled into the back room of their Kingdom Hall on their premises, and I would be grilled, and then they would give me a decision. I'd be disfellowshipped, So we didn't get to that stage. What happened was they came to my sister's house, and the two elders were grilling me, trying to find out why I'd left my parents' home, what happened, why I moved into my own flat, why I'd now given up my flat, whether I had a boyfriend, whether I was seeing anybody, and basically what was going on with me. And at the time, I was just like, well, nothing's going on, because I haven't done anything, nothing's going on. And I've just assured them, do you know what, I'm just settling into my sister's, I'm going to be back. And they were like, okay. And I think I went to the new meetings maybe once or twice, and that was it. I was like, this isn't for me. I'm not going back. Because by this time, I'd moved into my sister's, and I had time to think, but also time to talk to her and to my nieces, my nephews, all the brothers and sisters, and to realise, actually, I really didn't believe a lot of what was being said, because now I could just think for myself, and it started to unravel. And then the one thing Jehovah's Witnesses tell you, do not go on the internet and do not research us. Now that things have changed slightly, because that was back in the 70s. I can clearly remember being told at meetings, at assemblies, at conventions, in their magazines, that the internet is an evil and wicked place and you're not to do it. And if you do have to go on for work, and they use the guise of porn, because if you go on the internet, you're going to get caught up in porn. And if you watch any porn, you're going to be disfellowshipped and you're going to lose your friends, you lose your family, you're going to be cut off. And they said, if you do have to go on for work, whatever you do not research Jehovah's Witnesses. And I remember that as clear as day. Do not research them. Well, what do? You go and research it. And I came across this website. And it was called Free Minds. I don't know if it's still there, to be honest, but it was probably evolved into other things. And let me tell you, I was scared as hell, because what they do is they put more fear, because my whole life as Jehovah's Witness was just encased in fear. And they put more fear on you and tell you anything that you read about Jehovah's Witnesses is from the devil. It's a lie. It's from the devil. Do not read it. Do not look at it. And in fact, the apostates, the people who write these things and create these websites, they are mentally diseased. That is what they tell you. And often at assemblies, conventions, you'd have people who were disfellowshipped or shunned, and they'd be out there with placards and, trying to warn everybody. And we were told, don't even look at them. Just keep your head down, walk past, and don't even look at them. Because if you look at them, you can be contaminated. There's all this fear. So I stumbled across this website called Free Minds, and the fear. Because remember, from a child I was told Jehovah's always watching you, God's always watching you, he knows what you're doing, he knows what you say. And I was petrified. But something was telling me to go on this. And this website was people who had left the Jehovah's Witnesses, was certainly classed as evil, demonic, apostates, mentally diseased, and you should have nothing to do with them. That's how Jehovah's Witness frame it. But these were people who'd left, who were like me, free thinkers, and was unpicking what they were told, but referencing it back to the Bible, and was like, hang on a minute. The Bible, Jehovah's Witnesses says this about blood transfusions. This is what the Bible say, and there is no connection whatsoever. Yeah? Jehovah's Witnesses say, for example, don't celebrate birthdays. This is what the Bible reference about birthday, and there is no connection to what Jehovah's Witnesses teach. So it was kind of things like that, and I started reading it, and I was like, actually it makes sense. I was petrified, and I remember staying up all night reading it. And this is when the internet was in its infancy. Well, we didn't have it on mobile phones or anything like that. You'd have your big old laptop. We didn't even have laptops then, your big old computer screens. And I was just drawn in. I was like, oh my goodness, this actually makes sense. It makes sense. So yeah, it all started unravelling. All started unravelling for me. So I left the Jehovah's Witnesses when I was 21, and I'm now 58, and it's taken me 37 years to still unpick a lot of that conditioning. And even when I left, this video, I need to wrap it up in a minute, but I do apologise for going on for so long, but there is just so much. One of the things that Jehovah's Witnesses taught is that if you're a young woman, like I was, and you dare to leave Jehovah, you're going to end up with a man that's going to physically abuse you. He's going to pimp you out, put you on the streets. You're going to end up homeless and a drug addict. And you're going to have an early, miserable and painful death. And that just got in here. It got in here. And even after I left Jehovah's Witnesses, and I know this sounds ridiculous, because most men are not like that. But even though I left, that was still burnt into my brain. And even when I would go on dates, that was still in the back of my mind, that he's going to beat me, that he's going to pimp me out, that he's going to offer me drugs. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that is the mind control, the level of mind control that they have had. And it's taken me a long time to unpick it. And, I look back and I think, that's probably why I've always struggled in relationships, because of the impact that it's had on me. And not everybody's going to be the same. I can only talk for me. But yeah, it's deep, guys. It's deep. It's very, very, very deep. But yeah. So I want to wrap this up now. My dad realised from an early age, no, not for him. He stopped going, never to return. My mother, she was on the fringes and she held some of the beliefs. I think she held most of the beliefs, but she could see towards her end of her life, she could see that they are not kind, loving, no. And she used to look at the whole disfellowshipping, shunning, and she was like, no, that is just absolutely abominable. She really didn't like that. And towards the end of her life, she wanted to celebrate her birthday. My mother passed just before her birthday, and if she'd have survived, we would have had a massive birthday party for her, because she said to me, I've never celebrated my birthday, never. And I just found that so sad. And that she was like 78 when she passed, and she never celebrated it because of a Jehovah's Witness belief. And I was like, yeah, we're going to celebrate your birthday, mother. So, so a lot of the beliefs she started to see, actually, not good. All my brothers and sisters had stopped going. One sister returned, and she's now really strong in it. And her daughter, and that little family, they're very much into it. And I'm like, that's them, that's good for them. You believe what you want to believe. And I have a brother that is very much like that. I think he holds some of the beliefs, but he doesn't go regularly, no, very much like that. I think he's more out than in. And other than that, nobody else believes it. And I stopped believing it when I was 21. Well, I stopped going when I was 21, and it took me a couple of years to unravel, and I'm still unraveling because of the psychological and the emotional and the mental and the psychological damage and trauma that group impacted my life with. And it sounds dramatic, but it's not drama for me. They had a massive, massive, massive impact in terms of my health, but also how I saw the world, how I see men. Even to this day, it still shapes me. Just a little bit. Not as much as it did 20, 25 years ago, but it still shapes me just a little bit. So yeah, I am now completely defunct of the Jehovah's Witnesses. I love watching all these loads of different YouTube channels and listening to podcasts about the Jehovah's Witnesses and what they're up to and how they're still trying to control and manipulate people. I love unpicking and hearing and seeing the hypocrisy that goes on and the manipulation. I just love those apostate channels, and I do watch them a lot. I watch them a lot and listen to a lot of them. But I say, if you want to know more, then definitely check out. There's loads of channels, absolutely loads. But I mean, the one thing I do want to just say really quickly is Jehovah's Witness absolutely robbed me of a faith and a belief in Jesus. Absolutely robbed me, because after I left, over many years, I decided, you know what, I don't even believe in God. I don't want to believe in God. I was just so confused about God and Jesus. And if you follow me on this channel, you know that in last year, September, October, I read the Bible, the whole Bible in 2 months via a fabulous podcast. It was a Catholic podcast, and absolutely loved it. It opened my eyes to the Bible, it opened my eyes to God, opened my eyes to some horrific stories in the Bible, but also some amazing stories too. And I thought, in 2026, I'm starting a new journey, and I'm going on a faith journey. And I want to, now that I feel that I'm sufficiently unravelled from the Jehovah's Witness, I want to go on a new journey and discover Jesus. I want to discover how I feel about Jesus, the Bible, Christianity, faith. And I want to get to know Jesus. When I see Christians who have a faith in Jesus, and I see how much they love Jesus and they love worship and they love Christianity and God and their faith, I'm quite envious. And I'm like, I wish I had that. But I feel like I was robbed because of growing up as Jehovah's Witness. So in 2026, I'm starting a new journey to discover how I feel and my faith. Well, discover how I feel and to explore faith and to find Jesus. Jesus isn't in the Kingdom Hall. Jehovah's there, and there's interpretations to what Jehovah is. But Jesus definitely isn't in there. But what I think I do want to do is go back to the Kingdom Hall one last time, to the hall that I grew up in, just to put that final nail in the coffin for me. I've not been rude, not been disrespectful or do anything like that, but just to put that ghost to bed and then move on with my new journey. So yeah, I'm on this journey to discover my faith, and to try and find Jesus in 2026. So if you want to come along with me, I'd love for you to do so. And I'm going to create a playlist on this channel where I drop those things. I'm going to be going to different churches to find a church that I feel that I can find Jesus in. So do come along with me. Guys, this has been a really, really long video. If you're still with me at this point, I hope you find it of value. Hope you find it interesting. Halfway through, I was thinking about maybe turning it into 2 videos, but now I think I'm going to just keep it as the one, so we've got that flow. So if you are still with me at this point, thank you so much. Drop your comments, drop your thoughts. Have you been a Jehovah's Witness? Have you ever spoken to Jehovah's Witnesses? Do you know somebody who's a Jehovah's Witness? Have you ever been to a Kingdom Hall? Have you ever been invited to their memorial, which is a topic for another day? It's a big one. Are you a Christian? Have you got a faith? What's your belief system? drop a comment. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear from you. Guys, thank you so much for being here with me. After that, I think I need a fresh cup of tea, so I'm going to have that. I will see you on another video. Take care, guys. Bye.